in terms of voting districts. And as a political science association and as an association of experts in political behavior and candidate choice, we would like to contribute to our nation in this fashion by providing expert research on matters of politics. Therefore, on this score, without wasting much of your time, I would like to thank everyone, and for now we're going back to our Director of Programs for the remaining segments of our program.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe, for those words and information. Opinion polls are an important instrument in elections. The question is, what is an opinion? Who conducts it? How is it conducted? And does it influence the voter and indeed the elections? In some cases, election opinions have got it wrong, like in 2015 in England, when election pundits did tell the country in UK that there will be a hung parliament. That was proved wrong, as the Conservatives won with a huge majority. To take up this presentation is Professor James Skinner on the role of opinion polls in the American political system. Welcome, Mr. Skinner.
Actually, it's Richard. We can switch on here.
Oh, Richard, yes, it is Richard, yes, sorry. Richard, are you?
You can switch on.
Great.
Switch on the project.
Okay, are we ready?
We're ready, Richard. Welcome to this forum.
Wait, okay. We're trying to film. Just a sec.
Sure.
I'm ready.
Maybe you can just if you're having problems.
Okay.
Use the remote. Is the remote? Is this remote? You can present. You can present.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Greetings from the UK. Firstly, I'd like to thank Dr. Chiwa and all his colleagues at the University of Zambia for the opportunity to present some introductory remarks this morning. It really is an honour and a pleasure to be with you all here today, albeit from the UK where I live, and I hope that next time we're all able to do it safely in person. As my colleagues here have mentioned, my name is Richard Elson, and I'm a London-based communications consultant. Over the course of a nearly 30-year career, I've worked on many political campaigns, both here in the UK and Europe, but also in Africa and in other parts of the world. For some years, I worked for the British Labour Party here, specifically Tony Blair in his first term in office. I worked very closely with teams in Labour HQ in London, while managing the Rapid Response Unit set up to engage with the media through that election campaign. I can tell you it was very hard fought. Over the years, an important aspect of my work has involved coordinating with pollsters. Many times I've done that. It has actually been quite remarkable to see how field research has evolved and improved over the years, and how research teams are able to build regression models and pull deeper insights from the results that they compile. But also, it's been very interesting to see how sometimes polling samples can miss the mark, which has certainly been the case in a number of recent US elections, for example. I've always found polling and poller data to be fascinating. Of course, it all started way back in 1932 when a young man's mother-in-law ran for office in Iowa in the USA. She was running against a very popular incumbent, and everyone except this one young man thought her candidacy was a lost cause and that she couldn't win. Absolutely. But he thought differently, and he polled her constituency. Then he came back with his data and told her, hey, you know what, actually you can win, and he gave us some advice which she followed. Hers was only the first of very, very many elections he was to predict correctly. His name was George Gallup, the founder of modern polling, and I think in a way it's thanks to him that we are here today to do this presentation. One thing I should make clear right up front now is that I am an independent observer of your upcoming election, but I have no involvement on behalf of any of the parties that are contesting and competing. I should also stress that I am not a pollster, nor was I involved in any way with the research being presented here today. The research being presented by Dr. Chiawa and his colleagues today does look very similar to polling exercises that I have observed in many other countries. Polling is a very common practice in the democratic process in Western nations, though many members of the public, perhaps understandably, started with suspicion or confusion when results appear to conflict with beliefs. Then there are also the misperceptions of confirmation bias, when the public believe that the results of a poll are meant to tell the future, but that's absolutely not the case. That is not what polls do. I would argue that most of the time when we think about election polls, we think about strategic impact. What each candidate and party does with the information that they obtain from the poll in order to gain a political advantage. And while they do that, in reality, that's only a small part of a poll's importance and meaning. Public polling is, in my view, a sign of a free society. It shows that independent researchers and organizations are able to gather data about what the citizens want and what their preferences are able to do that freely. In other countries where they lack basic civil rights and access to democracy, of course, the leadership would simply declare what the people want without asking them. So polling, in my view, speaks to the health of democracy in the countries where polling exercises do take place. It is a healthy sign. A robust public polling is a marker of a free democratic society. It's also a testament to the ability of organizations outside of government to gather and publish information about the well-being of the public and also citizens' views on major issues of the day. In nations without this robust polling, the head of government simply decree citizens' wants and needs instead, which, in my experience, is always very unhealthy and undermines free expression and democracy. The most fascinating aspect of polling, in my view, is how researchers design their methodology so as to reduce bias, to achieve quality representative samples, and narrative question formats that deliver consistent results. There's also the issue of statistical weighting samples to match the population, which has also helped to improve accuracy in polling. A number of key factors need to be present to accurately reflect the demographics, such as age, gender, education, economic standing, and so on. I am pleased to say that the research being presented today by Dr. Chiwa is based upon sound methodology, having seen the questionnaire and the way that the poll has been conducted. Polling often comes under pressure from its, and probably the most well-known example would be the 2016 US presidential election, where Hillary Clinton was heavily tipped in the polls, but ended up losing to Donald Trump, as we all know. Many pundits proudly announced that polling was broken and could no longer be trusted. But this isn't actually true at all. Though I would agree with some of the criticism that the state-level poll samples represent university-educated voters, ultimately, Trump's election victory came down to just 107,000 swing voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which was actually in line with the polls and margin of error. It's just that the undecided voters broke heavily for Trump and not Hillary, hence the result. Another surprise result closer to home, here in the UK, was the Brexit referendum result in 2016, which led to distrust of pollsters, with many people and many pundits declaring that researchers are unable to gather accurate public opinions. But again, I would argue that this is highly misleading. The 51% leave, 48% remain result of that referendum came down on the Remain side, who for some reason decided to stay at home and not vote. There's speculation, and I support it. Many thought the desired result of Remain would happen anyway without their party, and so their numbers were diminished, and Brexit went the way of Lead, unfortunately, in my view. I believe that the point to take away is that, and hopefully this will be seen today by those who comment on polls, is that polls are neither right or wrong based on results of elections. That's not what they are. Polls tell us what proportion of a population has a specific viewpoint. That is the information. They do not explain why respondents believe as they do, or how to change their minds. This is the work of social scientists and scholars, not pollsters. Polls are simply a measurement tool that tell us how a population thinks and feels about any given topic. This can be useful in helping different sections of society understand one another, because it gives the people to speak for themselves instead of letting only vocal media stars speak on behalf of everybody. Most people cannot afford an advertising campaign, and many people are not inclined to share their every opinion on social media, for example. Opinion polling gives people who do not usually have access to the media an opportunity to be heard. And in Zambia, I think this is very, very vast stretches of territory across all of the provinces, the many different tribal groups that exist, and the various perspectives and perceptions of what people want in their government. So, I'm very much looking forward to hearing the results of the research from Dr. Chiawa and his colleagues, but not only in light of what people may think it means for the upcoming election, what it shows about how the Zambian public feels about the major issues of the day. And so with that, I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to present these introductory remarks and return you back to our esteemed panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
There are many issues, that affect the outcome of the election. But the key question is, what is the study, telling us? This is what we're going to hear from Aaron Siwale. Aaron?
Thank you very much. I think you could go back to the first slide on the methodology. Basically, our study, employed a mixed method approach, where both quantitative and qualitative data was collected. Out of 10 provinces, we did sample 5, provinces. Out of those 5 provinces, we did, sample 5 constituencies in each province. That brings, population to 25 constituencies, and our data collection instruments actually, our population comprised of eligible voters, that is of 18 years of age and above, and from the 5 provinces, you will discover that the 5 provinces that we sampled, I'm sure in the interest of time I may not be able to go there, but we did sample Wapura Province, Copperbelt, Eastern, Southern and Western Province, and the total registered voters, that number there, 1,192,573. And the sample of, a sample size of 59,628 was randomly sampled. Of course, that is 5% of the total registered voters in the respective provinces we sampled. And we believe that, sample is enough to represent, generalizability of our study. Out of the 59,628, respondents, we did further, purposively sample 500 respondents, that we, interviewed for qualitative data, and we got a lot of information from those. Yes. So we had, instruments, from self-administered questionnaires as well as guided interviews. It is as a result of, open-ended questionnaires, questions in the questionnaires and the, the guided interviews that we were able to get, qualitative data. The study, basically, you could ask, was not without any challenges. In most cases, we anticipate to do an opinion polls in an environment where people are willing to receive researchers. But in this case, it was a bit tricky in the sense that COVID, pandemic has hit, or at the time we were starting, had already hit most of the, parts of the province. It was very difficult actually for the researchers to easily get, the information. But we indeed managed, to control the issues that would affect validity and reliability by ensuring that we covered, multiple sources within, the sampled, districts, so that we could actually manage to triangulate by getting a lot of views from those we did sample. And we believe as a result of that, we're able to have, data that is valid and, to a greater extent, credible. So I will not delve much into talking about the sample sizes per province, because we're going to share these, figures. Yes. To preempt you, we're going to see just the total that is there is the number of respondents that we found: 13,014 in Western in Copperbelt, 6,159 respondents from Western Province, 14,324 from Eastern Province, 13,477 from Southern Province. Yes, Wapula 12,654 respondents. So it indeed is a study that was extensively, carried, and quite a number of people that we could use to generalize our findings were, contacted. Yes. I think I would like to call upon now the principal investigator to come and give us the actual, data that we indeed
Thank you very much, Aaron. Ask Dr. Shearer, to come and give us the key research and the findings. Doc.
Thank you. So, I'm going to present to you the findings of our study, but we'll wait for the slides to start showing. So just to emphasize on the methodology that my colleague talked about, we also ensure that our study, the findings, we maintained rigor in this survey. First of all, by doing what we call member checking. So a few of the scripts that we transcribed, we sent back to a few of the respondents so that they could verify that the scripts contained exactly what they told us. We also did what we call peer reviewing. So we had to engage other professionals to look at the data that we collected to ensure that there was rigor. So we also had debriefing. So we had to present the preliminary findings to other stakeholders who criticized, reviewed, and advised us on how best we are going to improve on the findings. So the findings that I'm going to present to you, they are rigorous. They underwent peer review. So the first part of the findings, we're going to look at the demographics of the participants in this study. So from our study, in terms of gender, there were more females that took part than males. So 56% of the respondents were females, as opposed to 44% were males. In terms of levels of education for our participants, the majority, which is 45% of the respondents, stated that they had attained secondary education. 30% had attained primary education, and 15% reported that they had attained tertiary education. 10% of our respondents stated that they had no formal education. In terms of age range, the majority of the participants in this study were aged between 18 and 39, and that represented 54% of the participants. This was followed by those in the range of 40 to 59 years, who comprised 31%. Then 12% of the respondents were in the age range of 50 to 69, and the rest were above 70 years. In terms of employment status, 73% of the respondents were in formal employment, 16% were in informal 16% were formal employed, and 11% were not employed. In terms of voting interest, when we asked the question, in your view, how important is it that people vote in an election? 65% of the respondents remarked that it was very important for them to vote in an election, in a presidential election. Well, 1% of the respondents stated that it wasn't important. So the 65% participants who saw voting as very important stated that this was because this was the only way they were going to ensure that capable leadership was put in office. If you can go back, we look at the 1%. The 1% participants who said that voting was not important, they felt that when you vote for people, it's just one way of enriching themselves, enriching politicians.
So they were not interested. They didn't see elections to be important. So the other reasons that were given by the 1% population that was not interested in voting were perceived lack of transparency by both the ruling party and the opposition. Some also stated that they felt that these political parties lacked internal, intra-democracy. They felt that leaders were imposed within the political parties. Then they were also discouraged by political violence that has perpetrated our society. Others felt that their vote would not make a change, so it was not important for them to vote. So this comprised 1% of the participants in this study. So we also asked them to rank presidential, parliamentary, mayoral, or ward elections. Of this, 90% of the respondents were more interested in the presidential elections. This was followed by those who were interested in parliamentary elections, who accounted for 90%, and mayoral elections 89%, ward elections at 50%. So the presidents, why 98% of the respondents were interested in presidential elections was because they felt that presidency is an institution. Hence, it's the most important office in the land, and as a result, they felt that it was important to participate in a presidential election. Then those who also felt that voting in a parliamentary election was important, they felt that MPs' performance can either motivate or demotivate electorates. They also felt that MPs are important because of their proximity and accessibility to the public. They felt that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to access the presidency, but it's much easier to access an MP. Some considered voting as a civic duty, so they felt duty-bound to participate in an election. Part 3 of our study looked at the perception of the electoral process, how the respondents perceived the electoral process. Our findings revealed that, you can move, slide. Our findings revealed that 95% of the respondents were not first-time voters, so that voted before. 2% were newly registered voters, and out of this, 3% declined to respond to this question. For example, one of the registered voters in Mwense remarked, yes, I voted in 2016 and 2015 general election. This is particularly important, and I'm geared to cast my vote come August 12, 2021. So this was one of the respondents who had voted before and was looking forward to voting this year. Then the newly registered voters stated that they had attained legal voting age after the 2016 general elections, whilst others were adults of voting age but had registered for the first time to participate in the elections. We also posed the question to the participants, like there are lots of different reasons why people do not vote. For you personally, how much of a reason, if at all, is each of the following for why some or you did not vote? Our study revealed that 80% of the participants who did not vote in 2016 felt that their vote would not make a difference. Well, 1% said that they did not like politics, so that was apathy. Then we also posed the question to them to find out whether elections in Zambia are free and fair. 55% of the participants were not too sure whether elections were free and fair in Zambia. For example, one of the respondents from Petaoke stated that, I don't know what goes on behind the scenes.
20% of the respondents remarked that they strongly agreed that elections were free and fair, as can be seen from a quote from one of the participants from Choma, who stated that the elections are free and fair because they are monitors from all over the world. They are monitors who come from all over the world. And political parties do have monitors, so how can elections be manipulated? So they felt that elections are highly monitored by both local and international monitors. However, one interesting finding was that 8% strongly disagreed that elections in Zambia are free and fair. Like one participant from Luanshya stated that the opposition aren't given an opportunity to campaign freely as the ruling party is. We also posed the question, if these respondents were aware of changes in the voting procedures brought about as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. Interestingly, 85% of the respondents were not aware of the changes. So there's need to do a lot of homework. However, 8% said they were aware. When asked about the measures, one of the participants from Lumezi stated that voters will be expected to wear masks and they'll be expected to maintain social distance. We also posed the question around COVID-19, wanted to find out if the pandemic would affect the voters' ability to go and cast their votes in this year's elections. 65% of the respondents stated that COVID-19 was most likely going to affect their ability to cast their votes. Like one respondent from Dola Central constituency stated, that it depends on how we will manage the pandemic. As it stands, it would definitely affect my ability to cast a vote. So this participant felt that the chances of them casting a vote in this year's elections were slim. 5% of the participants reported that COVID-19 would not affect their ability to vote. They were geared, determined. Like one participant from Mwandi in Western Province stated that come what may, I will exercise my right to vote. However, 1% of the participants were not too sure. Like one respondent from Chingola stated that I know where I'm coming from, I know where I am, but I don't know what the future holds. We also sought to get the perspectives of the respondents on what the government and other stakeholders could do to make voting safe in the midst of COVID-19. Our findings revealed that 60% of the respondents reported that they should enforce mandatory wearing of face masks, social distancing, and at polling stations there should be hand sanitizing facilities. We also touched on a very thorny issue of public media. We wanted to find out the views of the participants on how they perceived the public media. That's ZNBC, Times of Zambia, Zanis, Daily Mail, among others. Interestingly, 78% of the participants reported that the public media was biased towards the ruling party, while 8% stated that it was fair, it was not balanced, it was not biased. Like one respondent from Western Province in Mangango remarked, the respondent said that of course the public media is not fair in its coverage of the candidates. So this participant felt that public media gives more airtime to the ruling party as opposed to the opposition. So public media was perceived not to be fair. We also touched on the issue of the police, on how they manage political campaigns. 88% of our respondents were of the view that the Zambia police has not been fair in managing political campaigns. They felt that the Zambia police leans towards the ruling party. 3%, however, felt that the Zambia police were fair. Then we also looked at ECZ's capacity to manage free and fair elections in the midst of COVID-19. 65% of our respondents said that ECZ had the capacity to manage free and fair elections, while 32% said ECZ did not have the capacity, and 2% of our respondents declined to comment. Part 4 deals with voter choice. So we wanted to find out if people had seen, heard, or read any information relating to candidates who are contesting in this year's general elections. 95% of the participants stated that they had seen, heard, read about campaigns. But 5% said they had not seen or heard about the campaigns. So we still have a bit of work to do. Then we also, we had to segment it according to provinces. We wanted to find out from our respondents whom they felt would effectively manage the affairs of this country. So we start with Southern Province. In Southern Province, so this was a survey. If elections were held today, get me clear. If elections were held today, the opposition UPND candidate, Mr. Farraline Hijilema, would get 65% of the votes in Southern Province. And he would be followed by PAF's candidate, Mr. Edgar Chagwalungu, who would get 10%. That is if elections were held today. Others such as Fred Membe of the Socialist Party would get 1.3. Nevas Mumba, Democratic Party's Hari Kalaba, and Andy Fordibanda of PAC would get 1% each. However, 20.6% of the respondents declined to comment on this. What were some of the reasons people gave in their preference for Mr. Hishirema? Some of the reasons were that they felt that he was a visionary leader and that he had a clear developmental plan for the country. They also said that he has made good promises to transform the landscape of Zambia. However, others felt that it was just time to change leadership in Zambia. Others felt that Mr. Hichilema, others actually felt that there was need for new ideas because the current government has been in power for some time. While others stated that all they wanted was just to change leadership, to try new leadership. These were the findings from Southern Province. Then we move to Luapula Province. In Luapula Province, if elections were held today, Mr. Edgar Chagwalungu of PF would get 65.3%. And he would be followed by Mr. Farraline Hijilema, who would get 8.8%. Mr. Nevas Mumba would get 3.05%, Mr. Harry Kalaba 2.38%, Mr. Fred Membe 1.18%, while the rest of the candidates would share the remaining less than 10%. 12.6% of the respondents declined to respond to this question in Luapula province. So the 65.3% of the people who said they would vote for Edgar Chagwalungu gave the following reasons for their choice. One, they felt that he had shown great leadership qualities under difficult circumstances. They also stated that he had revived industries such as Kawambwa Tea Company and the setting up of sugar factory in Luapula. They also stated that he had changed the face of Luapula province through infrastructure development such as roads, hospitals, and schools, including the setting up of housing units for Zambia Special Forces in Kawambwa. They also stated that he had revived the tourism industry, especially in Zambia. They also highlighted the cassava plantation in Luapula province. Then also the hosting of Luapula Expo, which the participants felt it had opened up the province to the world. We move to Eastern Province. If elections were held today, the PF candidate Edgar Chagwalungu would get 70.3%. He would be followed by UPND's candidate, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, who would get 15.9%. Well, MMD's Nevas Mumba would get 3.05%. DP's Harry Kalaba would get 2.38%. Mr. Fred Membe would get 1.18%. Well, Mr. Nyurenda would get 1%. Mr. Banda 1.26%. Shalakateka would get 1.35%, and UNIP's Trevor Mwamba would get 0.03%. 3.55% of the respondents in Eastern Province declined to respond to this question. What were the reasons that were advanced in Eastern Province for the choice of Edgar Lungu? They stated that the past few years there's been early delivery of farming inputs. They also highlighted infrastructure development such as roads, hospitals, and schools. They talked about the youth empowerment programs. Some also stated that he's a man who stands for what he says and that he promotes Christian values in the country. And also some pointed out to the provision of social cash transfer to the vulnerable families in Eastern Province. Western Province. We move to Western Province. If elections were held today, 43% of the respondents in Western Province stated that they would vote for Mr. Hakainde Hichilema. 14.2% stated that they would vote for Edgar Chagwalungu. 7.88% said they would vote for Mr. Fred Membe of the Socialist Party. 4.03% would vote for Nevas Mumba, while less than 6.5% preferred other candidates. A huge number of respondents in Western Province, which stands at 24.4%, were either undecided or they declined to comment. What were the reasons given for supporting HH? One, they felt that HH offers better solutions to fix the country's problems. They also said that HH has promised to run an open and transparent administration, and that HH has promised to improve the country's standing around the world. The last province that we're going to consider today is the Copperbelt province. In the Copperbelt province, or on the Copperbelt province, if elections were held today, Edgar Chagwalungu of PF would get 61.1%, followed by Mr. Hakainde Hichilema of UPND at 26.5%, Well, 4.4% of the respondents were undecided. 8% preferred other candidates. So the reasons they gave, the 61.1%, the reasons they gave for preferring Edgar Chagwa were that he had preserved jobs on the copper belt. For example, they cited that he intervened to save jobs that would have been lost had the mines been placed under care and maintenance. That's Mopani and KCM. They also highlighted the massive infrastructure development such as housing units for the service personnel, roads, hospitals, and schools. They also stated that he has stabilized the country under difficult circumstances. And also they highlighted the handling of COVID-19 pandemic, which has not resulted in many people losing their jobs. They also stated that the provision of social cash transfer had benefited and transformed the lives of the beneficiaries. So, summary of this study's findings. If elections were held today, Edgar Chagwa would score 44.5%. Mr. Hakainde Hichilema would score 30.33%. Mr. Fred Membe would come third at 2.61. Nevas Mumba 2.13. Mr. Hari Karava at 1.93. Mr. Andiford Banda at 1.23. Well, the rest of the candidates would get less than 1% each. Interestingly, we have a big number of eligible voters who are still undecided on whom they will vote for. So our study revealed that 15.6% of the eligible candidates who took part in this study were undecided on whom they would vote for if elections were held today. So this marks the end of the presentation of this study's findings. I hand over to the Director of Ceremony.
Hello. Congratulations, Doc and your team. Very important findings. My advice to you and to your team is that you make these important findings to key players such as ECZ, political parties, NGOs, traditional leaders, perhaps even our corporate partners, local government, Ministry of Health, in view of the likely impact of COVID, and of course, Cabinet Office, and indeed the media. Just a caution, we are all professional journalists. I think when we present these findings to the people, we must indicate that this is a partial opinion. We don't want a situation where you start, coming up with banner headlines. The election has already been won, but whichever. This one, the people have rejected them. I think it's important that perhaps even before when we finish this event, you consult my colleagues who did the findings on the best way of presenting these findings, because we don't want to end up in a situation that we mislead the electorate and then we paint a bad picture on the people who conducted the findings. Having said that, we really under pressure with time. We'll take a maximum of 5 questions. Please indicate the media that you represent.
I'm with SML TV. Clearly, you've indicated that this was done over 5 provinces. When are you going